Greetings and welcome to the Sunday Sermon. I'm Reverend Riff. Thank you all for being here. Looks like we've got a full house already this morning, and that makes me smile. I appreciate you guys getting up on Sunday morning to hang out with me. Oh, Bale with the subscription. Thank you, Bale. Yeah, the congregation is here, and I couldn't be happier about it. Um, Everybody's here. We're going to have some fun. We're going to say lots of silly things and talk about some stuff. So it's been 2 weeks since we've been here, thanks to my much needed vacation. So I feel like we should take just a minute and, get everybody back on the same page. So this season, we've been playing around in the New Testament just to give us a break from the Old Testament, which we've had so much fun with. And we talked about the first one. We kind of got an idea. We used Riff's cock and Riff's ass to get an idea as to who wrote what and what their motivations were. Then, on the second episode, we dove into who really was Paul. And we kind of, we ended up with the idea that maybe he was a Russian or a Roman agent. Maybe he was just an opportunist who wanted to be a part of something but didn't want to do all the hard work of being a Jew, so he just decided to hijack their religion for his own benefit. Doesn't really matter which of those you ascribe to, just more that one of those is very likely the case, and that what you're reading in the New Testament, he's a Russian disinformation troll. That's pretty accurate, actually. And we also spent some time talking about Vespasian. And he's going to get a lot more airtime as this season goes on, so we're going to talk about him a little more today. Of course, Vespasian was who took over after Nero killed himself. You had the year of 4 emperors. Galba, Gaius, and I forget, Vimalda or something was the other guy. They all lasted just a couple months as emperor, and Vespasian locked shit down. And his key achievement in gaining the support of the Senate and the other influential people in Rome that allowed him to become the emperor was that he put down the rebellion in Judea. He sacked Jerusalem. Really, his son did that for him, but he, mopped up, controlled this outbreak, and reopened the pipeline from Egypt to Rome. Because I think we need to think about that is what is key. Rome had grown to the point, it was a true megacity at this point. Rome could not sustain itself. The main issue was, even in the surrounding areas, Rome could not produce enough grain to feed everyone in Rome, especially to the level that they were used to being fed. So, Egypt was the breadbasket of the world at this point. That pipeline was absolutely crucial for maintaining order in Rome. You lose that grain pipeline, people start getting hungry, you start getting infinitely less popular. And being as Israel is right in the middle of that pipeline on land, of course, sea journeys, which we'll actually talk about today, were a little more, dangerous back then. So keeping that pipeline open and keeping the grain flowing, that kept people happy. You did that, you were going to have supporters. And Vespasian did that. He becomes emperor, ruled for 10 years, then his son Titus takes over. He was the emperor, actually, when Vesuvius blew. And some took that as a portent of doom. Then Titus died shortly after he had some kind of medical malady. We don't know exactly what, but he died after only about just under 3 years on the throne. And his brother, Domitian, took over. And all of the persecution that Christians like to ascribe to the early days of the church actually took place like 50 years later under Domitian. He reinstated the idea that the emperor was a god figure and that everybody needed to worship him, and he was not willing to grant the Jews the dispensation that they had been granted under previous emperors, and especially under Vespasian and Titus, who of course were taught who positioned themselves as Roman messiahs. That is around the time that the book of Mark is written, which very clearly is pro-Roman propaganda, which kind of props up Vespasian and Titus in the idea that they should be regarded as the Messiah that the Jews have been waiting for. Your Messiah came. Caesar did have quite a story about an Egypt-Rome sea journey. We're going to talk about some other sea journeys today. We're going to have fun with this. But yeah, so the idea is that Rome, they didn't really care about Israel as far as controlling it. It didn't mean a lot to them. What they needed was they wanted the tax money that came out of it, and they wanted that pathway open for quick, free travel so that they could get their grain from Egypt. And as long as that didn't get fucked around with too much, they generally had a hands-off approach to the Jews. But the Messianic prophecy kept rearing its head and creating these uprisings. The Zealot movement was born, our, at least etymological forefathers. And the Romans finally had enough, and they decided they would sabotage the Jewish religion. The ultimate act of anti-Semitism is Christianity. It cuts the nuts off of Judaism, and the Romans also were very effective, we're going to talk about this today, at snuffing out the old order of Jewish priests and the way that things had been done, and ushering in a much less political era of Jewish priests. And that is how they did that, was through Christianity and through wanton murder. They were really, really good at that too. But today, what we're going to talk about today is stories that appear in the Bible. Again, we're going to stick to the New Testament today, although we're going to reference the Old Testament for just a few minutes, just for comparison's sake. And as I've been positing this whole season, that the New Testament is not a historical record. It is not an unbiased detailing of events. Instead, it has a very clear agenda, a very clear message, and when you pick that apart, it starts to seem a lot more like propaganda. And one of the ways that you do propaganda well is you co-opt familiar stories and you change the details around to fit your narrative. And today we're going to look at a few instances in the New Testament where there are stories that we can verify through non-biblical sources. And they seem awfully close to the ones that we see in the Bible. So much so that a reasonable person might assume that these stories never happened in the Bible. They just took a commonly known story and retconned it to fit their Bible narrative. And doesn't that sound exactly like the kind of thing a state-run propaganda program would do? Co-opt a commonly known narrative? Sure sounds like it to me. So let's dive in, shall we? So, I called this one Cool Story Bro, but I feel like I've heard that before, because that's the long and the short of it here. Like, these stories, I think some of them are very common stories that people know, and all of a sudden you're like, wait, that's in the Bible? Because I've heard that story somewhere else. And that is what the Romans did really well. So let's look at a few examples. This is not unique to the New Testament by any means. The Old Testament has a lot of this going on as well. I think if you paid attention during season 3, you know that the Old Testament was written when the Jews were in exile in Persia. And, I'm sorry, Babylon. And then it became Persia. So they're in exile. And they're told, hey, you need a history. You need a way to define yourselves as a people. You need a reason for this belief system that you have. You need documents so that, you can set up a ruling class. So they write all this stuff down. And being that they were in a place, they wouldn't have been the only diaspora there. There would have been all the other people that were conquered there too. It's honestly very logical when you think about it that some of these other cultures' stories that predated the Hebrews would have seeped in and, oh, I like that story. Let's just change it up a little bit and use our God instead of their God. That happened a lot. And most rational people, I say most, accept that. And when they read the Old Testament and they find these stories that have an analog in another culture that's, a little too close for comfort, they tend, yes, flood, absolutely plotless. They tend to say, oh, well, that just happened back then. That doesn't mean these aren't true. And okay, but those same people are often absolutely shocked when you point out to them that the New Testament has that same stuff going on. But let's look at some of the Old Testament instances of this occurring. I'm calling them Old Testament remixes. First one, the creation story. Let's start right at the beginning. We've beat this horse to death. That is going to be a special sermon that we're going to do in a couple weeks. Is we're going to look at Adam and Eve from a very interesting lens, and I'm going to prove to you that women are not human and that lizard people exist. It's in the Bible. You're just not reading it right. But that's not this week's story. But we know the story. God creates the earth in 6 days. Deceitful serpent tricks foolish woman. She then tricks foolish man. We're all fucked. That's the story, right? That's a pretty unique story. There can't be anybody else that has a creation story like that. Except for the Persians, Phoenicians, Egyptians, and Chaldeans. All have creation myths that involve a 6-day creation cycle and a deceitful serpent. You can't make that shit up. That's way too close. Also, a fun A-side, I'm sure everybody remembers our Tower of Babel sermon. The Chaldeans have the exact same story. They have a story about people who build a tower because they want to confront the gods directly, so the gods curse them by changing all their languages. It's the exact same story. The Chinese creation myth involves man being made from dirt and the breath of life bringing this dirt to life, and that woman was broken off of man and created from. It's the same fucking story. These are not unique. These are not original. It's the same shit. That should give pause. The flood, as Plotless pointed out. Anybody ever hear of a little story called the Epic of Gilgamesh? Because it's got a terrifyingly similar flood story about an old man who gets a boat, puts his family on it, and puts all the animals on it because the gods are angry and it's going to rain and ruin everybody's shit. The difference, yeah, it's an eternal. Here's the difference. The Epic of Gilgamesh is at least 400 years older than the book of Genesis. That is a bare minimum. There are a lot of scholars that push it closer to 1,000 years older than the book of Genesis. So it's not like, oh, well, maybe they were writing them at the same time, or maybe two guys came up with it. No, it's not even close. The Epic of Gilgamesh massively predates the book of Genesis. Yet the stories are strikingly similar. Again, probably too close for comfort. It boggles the mind that people don't see this, or that they can explain it away somehow. Because I would really love for someone to explain to me how the Epic of Gilgamesh actually ripped off Noah, even though it's 400 years at minimum older. Like, the Epic of Gilgamesh basically predates the Hebrews as a people. So how can you steal a story from people that don't exist? Seems sketchy. Moses in the basket. This one might be my favorite because this is the one that really blows Christians' minds. Because if you talk to most educated Hebrew scholars, they will admit that Moses is about as real as King Arthur. He is very likely an amalgam of a bunch of different historical figures who did some wonderful things for the people of Israel, and it just seems cooler if you smash them all into one superstar, much like King Arthur. Moses, he's the same dude. I'm sure most of you, if you ever went to Sunday school, you learned the story of the baby Moses being put into a basket and hidden in the reeds because the Egyptians were killing Hebrew babies, which that makes no sense if we're led to believe that the Hebrews were also slaves to the Egyptians. Why? That would be like killing your stock. That makes no sense. But, when has the Bible ever had to make sense? Well, King Sargon of Agade is told to exact same story. He's hidden in a basket. He's hidden on the riverbank. A princess finds him, and he goes from being a commoner to a king. And that story is from 2800 BCE. For those of you keeping track at home, the Hebrew history starts around 2000 BCE, 21 to 2000 BCE. So we're talking a solid 700 to 800 years before the Hebrew people even exist. This story of the baby in a basket at the riverbed becoming the king and leader of his people is there. Well played, Plotless. So, these three stories right here, and we could go on. There's a bunch more, but I thought these are three that just about everybody knows. You don't have to be religious to be familiar with these stories. You don't have to be religious to, be familiar with these stories. And there's irrefutable proof that these stories predate not just the Bible. Because I've seen some Christian apologists that have taken the line, well, sure, these stories were written down before the Bible was written down, but the Hebrew people had been telling these stories orally since their birth. Oh, yeah? Well, what about the stories that are 700 years before their Hebrew people? That's a little tougher to explain. And apologists just get mad and call me a heathen, because that's what they do. Well, most people can accept that there are these kind of remixes, retcons, if you will, of the Old Testament. That doesn't really shock people. It's an old book, old stories. A lot of them are supposed to be metaphorical. Even your, more normal Christians will accept that. But the New Testament, that's much newer. It's right in the title. That's the direct story of what happened in the time of Jesus. And we know way more about what was going on in the world then than we do now. So we know those stories are true. Well, we do know way more about those times because the Romans were really good at keeping records. And a lot of their stuff survived. So we know a lot. We do. And what we also know is that a lot of these famous New Testament stories pop up in other places. Eerily similar stories that just happen to have a few details changed that make them compatible with Christianity. Shall we look? Let's look. We've got some New Testament remixes. Oh yes, we do. King Herod's slaughter of the innocent. You guys know the story. We talked about it not too long ago. We're going to talk a lot about Herod today. Herod's kind of the star today, so buckle up for that. But we know the story that Herod is told by the wise men. Again, this only appears in Matthew's gospel. The other three gospels somehow missed this massive event. That the three wise men, they come to Herod. They say, hey, the king of the Jews has been born. Herod's like, yeah, I'm right here. They're like, no, the real king of the Jews has been born. And Herod said, really? I would love to meet him and introduce him to my sword. And so when they don't come back and tell Herod where he is, Herod orders every baby boy under 2 years of age slaughtered in Bethlehem. Now, there are a lot of apologists that try to come up with ways as to why that story never shows up in any document except for the document of the book of Matthew. Nobody, and Herod did heinous, heinous shit. We're going to talk about Herod. Like I said, we're going to talk about Herod a lot today. Herod is the ultimate villain, except for he never gets his comeuppance. He lives to an old age and then dies. He was a royal dickhole. I mean that in every way. And everybody disliked him. No one liked this guy. His Roman, benefactors did not like him. The people that he ruled over fucking hated him. His own family didn't like him. This guy was despised by everyone. Everyone disliked this guy. Quick little tale about how much everybody disliked Herod. Herod, towards the end of his life, was he had some malady. We don't know what it was, but we know that pretty much his whole life he was in pain. He had some kind of physical ailment. I've seen everything from MS to eventually he got cancer to, all kinds of stuff. That's not the point. But the point is Herod is dying, and he knows it. And Herod's what he's real angry about is that no one is going to mourn him when he dies. He knows that actually the people of Judea are going to celebrate when he fucking dies. So Herod comes up with this plan to take all the noblemen and all the beloved patriarchs of all the families that are important in Judea, and he wants to put them in an arena and have them keep them under guard, and as soon as he dies, his men are to go and slaughter every one of them. That way, all of Judea will be in mourning when Herod is dead, even though they're not mourning him. He wants everybody to be sad when he dies. And if he has to murder someone from their family to affect that sadness, he will. Thankfully, the Romans caught wind of this and said, absolutely fucking not, you maniac. Would you just die already? And he did. But yeah, that is the kind of guy we're talking about here. That should give you a little bit of insight. So him being willing to murder all these babies totally checks out. No, not once would I dispute that Herod is absolutely willing to behave like that. But yet, every other awful thing that this fucking guy did, painfully documented because everyone hated him. So it's awfully odd that something this heinous, murdering a bunch of babies, didn't get documented. Now, I've seen some apologists say, well, you have to think, how many babies could there have been in a small town like Bethlehem? Maybe 20 or 30. So it wasn't this massive killing of thousands of children. It was 20 or 30 kids. It didn't make a big blip. I don't buy that because, as I stated, everybody hated Herod. Anything you could write about this guy to put him in a bad light, anyone would believe. So not writing, nobody else mentioning this, just the book of Matthew, even the fact that the other gospels don't mention it. if all the babies were killed, who would write down that the babies were killed? Flawless logic. Herod's slaughter of the innocent did happen, and it's been written down. It's just not what you think it is. Matthew took a story and he changed some very important details. And again, remember, Herod died in 4 BCE. So Herod's dead before we flip over to the AD. Matthew doesn't get written till closer to 78 or 80 CE. Nobody would have been alive. Nobody would even remember Herod, really, other than that guy was a real dick. So if you write that he did this heinous fucking thing, people are just going to buy it. They'll be like, oh yeah, is that what it was? I thought it was a little bit different, but sure, that checks out. Smart move. Paul's shipwreck en route to Rome. Paul had been agitating the Jews, as, is the response to anti-Semitism, by going around and telling everybody that you didn't need to be a Jew anymore, just believe in Jesus, and you get all the benefits of being a Jew without having to mutilate your dick. You can have cheeseburgers, you can eat bacon, it's a great time. That's what Paul's telling everybody, and the Jews are really pissed. They've assaulted him numerous times, if you believe the book of Acts, which is, we've talked about, that's a stretch. But Paul is relentless. Finally, the Jews are like, we want this dude dealt with. And Paul goes, I don't answer to your court. I'm a Roman citizen. I answer to Caesar. And the famous line from Felix the procurator, if you have appealed to Caesar, then to Caesar you will go. And they put Paul on a boat and send him to speak with Nero about Paul's constant agitation of the Jews and the problems it's creating for everybody. On the way there, Paul shipwrecks. And Paul, of course, comes out of the story looking like Schwarzenegger. Just total badass hero. Well, there's another story that's really, really similar to that. Josephus, the famous historian, who much of what we know about the goings-on in Judea at the time, he had a little shipwreck on the way to Rome. And a lot of those details are awfully close. I should also point out that Josephus was known as Flavius Josephus. Why? Because he was the adopted family member of Vespasian and Titus. He was a turncoat. He had been a Jewish commander in the rebellion against the Jews. When he got captured, instead of getting executed, he was like, hey, I used to be a priest, and I know how to write. I could totally write down how awesome you guys are from a Jewish point of view. That would probably help people accept you guys. And so they execute his men, but not him. And Jews grow on to despise this asshole, rightfully so. But he ingratiates himself with the future emperor and becomes a beloved member of the family who writes about their tales and exploits. And again, so he would have been part of the Paulian conspiracy. Just saying. Details, they matter. Jesus heals the blind and infirmed. I'd say most of you know this story too. There's a blind man. What's important about these two healing miracles of Jesus too, before I describe them a little more, they come from Mark, which we know was the first draft of the Gospels. Mark would have been written right after Vespasian and Titus smashed the temple and installs himself as the emperor of the world. All of a sudden, this book of Mark comes out. And in it, Jesus performs two very specific miracles. He spits on some dirt and rubs it in this guy's eyes, and the guy is no longer blind. And there's a man who has a withered hand. Jesus touches it. The hand is no longer withered. These are very specific miracles that show Jesus' deity and his power. And you know what's really funny? Vespasian, there are two stories about him performing healing miracles. He spits in the dirt and rubs it in the guy's eyes, and the guy's not blind anymore. I'm sponsored by Puma and TurboTax. And then he also touches a guy's withered hand, and the withered hand becomes whole. So if I was trying to co-opt the religion and claim that the Messiah had already come, wouldn't it make sense to give that Messiah a lot of similarities to myself? Like, hey, that, similarities that nobody else could claim. Like, hey, I'm a magical healing guy. Good morning, Barry. That is oddly prescient there. So these are the kind of three stories. There's actually a 1A to one of these stories. But these are the three stories we're going to look at real quick and just get a feel for how they definitely remixed this shit. Because that's what they did. They just remixed these. These stories are remixes. So let's start with the first one. In this brutal painting here, I'm thinking stepping on the baby is probably enough to kill it, but my man is bringing the sword down too while he holds off the crushed mother. That is a painting, Barry. That is Herod's Slaughter of the Innocents. That is by Michelangelo. It's fucked up. Yeah, he's going to chop his foot off. This guy's form is terrible. And again, I think if you step on the baby, Also, that's a big fucking baby. Look at the proportion of that baby. That baby is huge. Like, it definitely has the features of a baby, but it's fucking massive. That is a big fucking baby. So, for all you Dewey Cox fans, we're going to talk about wrong kids died. We're going to talk about Herod's slaughter of the innocent. It's not fun. This is not a fun story, but basically, I'm going to give you the cliff notes first because I think they will help this make sense, and then I'm going to tell you the whole story. So Herod was a real dickhead. I think we've established that. He was the ultimate spoiled daddy's boy. For a car seat. Keep the baby safe. Yeah, he was the ultimate spoiled daddy's boy who also happened to wield supreme executive authority. It's not good. Spoiled daddy's boy, unlimited power, generally ends poorly for everybody. Antipater the Idumean. That's Herod's dad. This guy was... He's a fascinating figure, actually. He is also a giant dickhead, but man, he interacted with almost every famous person from his time. At some point crosses Antipater's path. And he has this bad habit of continually ingratiating himself to people who, at the time, are very powerful and could really help him out. And then they die. So he has to make a new friend. But give him credit, the guy's really good at making powerful friends. He is a weasel who changes sides more than a West Virginia Democrat. But his opportunistic, cold-blooded, ruthless maneuvering eventually leads with his son becoming king. So we can clown on him, but he got the job done. And no one is safe. Herod took paranoia to a level, like, he's like the paranoia king. That if being paranoid was a good trait, Herod would be man of the year every year. He was constantly in fear of something bad happening and someone trying to usurp his throne that he himself usurped. Because again, Herod's a dickhead. So I'm going to try now to lay out for you how Herod became king. Because this is important. It really, I think, makes the whole thing make sense. So how does Herod become king? Herod was a Sith Lord. That actually would make more sense. So, here's the first thing that I think shocks most people. Herod wasn't really Jewish at all. See, what happened is, as we've talked about before, the Hasmonean dynasty. The kings, the descendants of the Maccabees, who ruled like kings and were considered kings, but actually were the high priests. They were the rulers of the religious class, which default made them kings. Eventually, they made themselves real kings, as they were recognized by the Seleucid and Ptolemaic empires after Alexander the Great died. We talked about all that. So, during some of their campaigns, the Hasmonean kings expanded their territory. Some of the land they took was an area called Idumea and Nabata. These were two territories. The Idumeans were the descendants of Esau. Jacob and Esau, we talked about them from the Old Testament. The Israelites called this country Edom. Well, those people are actually Herod's kin. Herod's dad was an Idumean, and Herod's mother was a Nabatean princess. When the Jews took over, they forcibly converted everybody to Judaism. So Herod's family practiced Judaism, but no Jews actually recognized them as Jews because they had been forced to convert. I don't know why you force them to convert if you're not going to recognize them, but I'm also not a despot from 2,000 years ago, so what do I know? But Antipater really hated this. And he was always looking for a way to restore himself to a seat of power, as well as to get back at those pesky Jews. So, oh yeah, it's a lot of similarities, Plotless. A lot of similarities. So, shit's going down. Julius Caesar is in the battle with Pompey for control of the world, essentially. And Antipater, he's smart. He backs Pompey right before Pompey sacks Jerusalem. Pompey goes in, wipes out the Hasmonean kings, takes over and declares, "You have no king. We're ruled by prefecture. And Rome is in charge now. Fuck off." But he leaves the Hasmoneans in control of the priesthood. Because again, the Romans are kind of hands off with taking over people's religion. They don't really care as long as you're not causing them issues. So Pompey, big fan of Antipater now, he says, "Hey, you're the chief tax collector for this area." That's a super lucrative position because you rape people and collect way more taxes than they actually owe. Then you keep a healthy portion of that and send back to Rome what Rome is expecting. You're so far away, Rome doesn't care. They get their shipment of money. They don't care how much other money you take off people, how many bribes you take, whatever the case. So, very lucrative position. This Antipater was already wealthy. He was a wealthy merchant. He's now super paid. But then Pompey goes and dies. This does not help Antipater's case, because the guy who he was sure was going to win the emperorship is now dead. The guy that owes him favors, the guy that really liked him, that guy's dead now. Luckily for him, Julius Caesar does something really stupid. And after he defeats Pompey, he marches into Egypt. And Julius Caesar tells Cleopatra, "Hey bitch, you're not in charge anymore, and neither is your brother. I'm gonna pick who rules down here." He overplayed his position there, and the Egyptians got pissed. And they surrounded him. Julius Caesar is in deep shit at this point. He is way beyond his resupply area. His reinforcements are not going to get there in time. He's fucked. And all of a sudden, Antipater the Idumean, with 4,000 men and a bunch of supplies, comes riding in to save the day. He resupplies Caesar's army and helps him fight his way out of Egypt. At this point, Julius Caesar's like, "I really like this guy. This guy's awesome. You are now not only the chief tax collector, you're basically in charge of Judea. I dig you." Yeah, he basically rides in on a fucking eagle and saves the day. Then they don't ride the eagles to Mordor because plot holes. So he gets Julius Caesar out. Julius Caesar's like, "You're my dude. You're in charge." So things are really looking up. Antipater decides to make his two oldest sons, Herod and Herod's brother, he makes them governors, starting to set up a dynasty. So then, Julius Caesar, we all know what happens on the Ides of March. So now, once again, Antipater has lost his Roman benefactor. And so now, war breaks out between Cassius and Mark Antony. And I've not really I've not really been able to put together why. It's just that it is agreed on by historians that Antipater doesn't have a choice. He has to back Cassius. So he backs Cassius, who of course has to commit suicide when he loses his battle. Luckily for Antipater, Mark Antony is too busy dealing with everything else going on to go after him as well. So Antipater is still in charge in the Judea area, even though he's continually backed the dying horse here. Well, Mark Antony decides that he's got way too much going on right now. He leaves Antipater running things. Antipater is liked about as well as his son would go on to be, which is not at all. He dies. Someone poisons him. We don't know who. There are some rumors that it was Herod, and that Herod was a conniving enough bastard. He very well could have. We don't know. Somebody poisoned him. The list of people that dislike this guy is far too long to ever come up with a true suspect. But Antipater dies, so now Herod is worried that the rumor is that Mark Antony is going to appoint somebody else, possibly returning to the Hasmonean line, to be in charge of Judea. So Herod, he's a man of action. He acts very quickly, and he sends word to Mark Antony that he swears allegiance to him, and that he is going to win back land that has been lost to various small tribes in the glory of for the glory of Rome. Mark Antony likes the sound of that. So Herod, man of action, he gets out there and he does his thing. He's very successful. He wins back a bunch of territory, expanding the Judean borders to some of the largest they would ever get to. He makes sure he sends spoils and tribute back to Mark Antony. In fact, he goes and pays Mark Antony a visit himself with some of these spoils. And Mark Antony goes, very cool. You know what? You're king of the Jews. Herod's like, fuck yeah, that's what I was going for. And so Herod heads back down and goes, hey everybody, I'm king of the Jews. And the Jews look at him and go, lick my asshole, dickhead, you're not even a Jew. You're a piece of shit. We don't like you. So Herod realizes that while Rome recognizes him as the king of the Jews don't. And he doesn't have enough resources to enforce that. So he makes a deal. Remember all that talk about Pharisees and Sadducees, and that the Maccabees were basically Sadducees and were running things? Herod makes a deal with the Pharisees. Says, hey, you guys back me, and you get people on my side. Get me installed as king. I will put you guys in charge of the religion, not the Maccabees. So the deal is made. The Pharisees all of a sudden become pro-Roman because they become pro-Herod. Yeah, distributing circumcisions galore. So Herod is installed as king with some help from his Roman friends, some help from his own army, and the Pharisees at his back. And everyone really fucking hates him. But he's in charge now, but it's a very tenuous grasp on power. So he is advised that he needs to legitimize himself. And this is where Herod gets even creepier. Herod finds a 12-year-old girl named Mariamne, who happens to be a Maccabee. She's from the Hasmonean line. Herod becomes infatuated with this young girl, and he marries her. And it is known that she is his favorite. Herod has a bunch of wives and a bunch of kids by him. But it is always pointed out that this young girl, Mariamne, is his favorite. She would eventually produce him 2 sons. Herod assumes that now that he is married into the Hasmonean line, this will get people to sort of accept him. This completely fucking backfires. And instead, those 2 sons become absolutely fucking adored by the populace because they represent the Hasmonean side. Nobody gives a fuck about Herod, that he is considered a usurper, but they look at it, hey, Herod's gonna die. Those sons are at least half Maccabee. So when he dies, one of those sons will ascend to the throne, and we'll have a Maccabee on the throne again. And this enrages Herod, to the point that he takes his 2 sons and sends them to Rome. He goes, you guys are going to Rome now. You're going to prince school. You're going to learn how to be princes. And he sends them to Rome to get them out of the public eye so the public can stop fawning over them. He also pretty much locks Mariamne down, that he's the only one that sees her. I mean, he's got creepy level of obsession with this young girl. Well, Herod's sister is just as awful as Herod is. I mean, just as awful. And she does not like the idea that people are still clinging to these Hasmonean dynasty. So she creates the original Joseph and Mary story. What do I mean by that? She tells Herod that her husband Joseph has been sleeping with Mary Omni, that Mary and Joseph are a thing, and that how could he even be sure that those kids are his? They might not even be his kids, and that she's been unfaithful. Herod loses his shit and, in a fit of rage, kills Mary Omni and Joseph. He has Joseph apparently burned alive, and we believe that he literally beats Mary Omni to death because he's a psychotic asshole. His sons don't know anything about this because they're off in Rome. This is kept from them. When they come back, everybody celebrates them, so Herod has them killed. But wait, there's more. Mary Omni had a nephew through her, mother's side, who was the last and oldest remaining male Maccabee that had enough Maccabee blood to be considered a true heir. Herod has this 12-year-old boy announced as the high priest, takes him to the temple, and puts him in all the priestly garments. Then he takes him and has him drowned. He then goes on and kills any of his kids and anybody else's kids that have any Maccabean blood in them to effectively destroy the Hasmonean line. The slaughter is so bad that Caesar Augustus makes the statement, and it's a very clever statement when you think about it, it would be better off to be a pig than to be one of Herod's sons, because of course Herod keeps kosher, so he would have no need to kill a pig for food. But he kills sons a lot. So when Matthew talks about the slaughter of the innocent, what he's actually using is the memory of Herod slaughtering his own children and a lot of other people's children to ensure that no Maccabees followed him on the throne. Matthew took that story 80 some years later and decides to turn it into, no, Herod killed all those babies because he thought that he was going to get Jesus. Because it's an easy story to retcon, and everybody would buy it because they would remember some story about Herod killing a bunch of kids. That is also very likely why the Joseph and Mary story has the little whiff of adultery, and that Mary, she's queen of the earth. Mary is the one that we focus on because Mary Omni was beloved by the people. So, again, you make those little historical allusions, and it helps everything make sense. So that is Herod's slaughter of the innocent story. And I'm sorry that it's not a very uplifting tale. And you'll be happy to know, though, Herod got his comeuppance. And by that I mean he lived to a ripe old age and died. And that's the end of the story. At least Herod did get what he wanted another way too, because Herod didn't really trust anybody. Herod didn't want anyone to ever directly succeed him, and he didn't. His sister and two of his sons were given command of his kingdom after he died, in accordance with his wishes. And then the Romans were like, wait, you're related to that dickhead, and you're all dickheads too. And the Romans eventually just kind of exiled all of them and was like, hey, that Herod thing, that never happened. Let's just not talk about that failed experiment. Imagine that. You let a psycho have supreme executive power, and he does psycho shit. The Romans knew all about that. So, that was that. So that is where that story comes from. So, stop buying the nonsense that people give you about, the slaughter of the innocent really happened. It did, but it had nothing to do with Jesus. It had everything to do with the Maccabees. So, let's move on to Paul's shipwreck. And we're going to start by reading the Gospel of Acts. We're going to read Acts, and this is the story of Paul's shipwreck. And I thought it's not very long, so I thought we would just read it together, because that just seems easier, right? So on the 14th night, we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea, when about midnight the sailors sensed that they were approaching land. They took soundings and found that the water was 120 feet deep. A short time later, they took soundings again and found it was 90 feet deep. Fearing that we would be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. In an attempt to escape the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending that they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved." So the soldiers cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it drift away. Bold fucking move. Can you ask where I find out about these histories? The History of the Jews by Josephus has an amazing amount of interesting historical documents to read. You can also read Origen was his name. He was a 2nd century Roman historian who wrote a lot of interesting stuff, and also Tacitus. His histories of the Jews are very detailed. Those are the 3 authors. If you want to know more about this stuff, read Tacitus, read Origen, and read Josephus's Histories of the Jews. So, bold move here. They've cut the lifeboat away. They're staying on the ship. Just before dawn, Paul urges them all to eat. Notice, Paul is a prisoner on this ship. Yet, he's clearly in charge, because that totally makes sense. Fucking Christians. Always gotta Hercules their guys. So for the last 14 days, he said, "You have been in constant suspense and have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. Now I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. Not one of you will lose a single hair from your head." Paul's making bold claims. After he said this, he took some bread and gave thanks to God in front of all of them. Then he broke it and began to eat. They were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. Although there were 276 of us on board, when they had eaten as much as they wanted, they lighted the ship by throwing the grain in the sea. Making the ship lighter is a common thing you do to make it easier to navigate. When daylight came, they did not recognize the land, but they saw a bay with a sandy beach, where they decided to run the ship aground if they could. Cutting loose the anchors, they left them in the sea, and at the same time untied the ropes that held the rudders. Then they hoisted the foresail to the wind and made for the beach, but the ship struck a sandbar and ran aground. The bow struck fast and would not move, and the stern was broken to pieces by the pounding of the surf. The soldiers planned to kill the prisoners to prevent any of them from swimming away and escaping, but the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life, because once again the Romans bail Paul out. Yes, it is a huge boat, right, Zale? It seems odd. Why are they taking all these prisoners to Rome? There can't be this many political prisoners. But the centurion wanted to spare Paul's life and kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and get to land. The rest were to get there on planks or on other pieces of the ship. In this way, everyone reached land safely. So imagine that, just like Paul said, everybody gets to land safely. I didn't put it in here, but the next verse is super fun. Paul and his men are taking these now wooden planks and trying to build a fire to dry off on the beach. And as Paul's gathering some driftwood, a viper jumps out and attaches itself to Paul's hand. And the natives on the island go, "Surely this man must have been a murderer, because the sea couldn't get him, and now the land is rectifying that." Paul shakes the snake off into the fire, and nothing happens, because Paul is that much of a badass that poisonous snake bites don't even slow him down. But, so that's the story of Paul's shipwreck. It's designed as a story to explain to you that Paul getting to go to Rome and talk to the Romans and talk to the emperor was so important that even a shipwreck wasn't going to stop him. God had this dude's back. I now present to you the account of Josephus's shipwreck, and you tell me if you notice any similarities. But when I was in the 26th year of my age, it happened that I took a voyage to Rome, and this on the occasion which I shall now describe. At the time when Felix was procurator of Judea, there were certain priests of my acquaintance, and very excellent persons they were, whom on a small and trifling occasion we had put into bonds, and sent to Rome to plead their cause before Caesar. That's awfully similar right off the bat. Paul's boats and hoes. These I was desirous to procure deliverance for, and that especially because I was informed that they were not unmindful of piety towards God, even under their afflictions, but supported themselves with figs and nuts. Accordingly, I came to Rome, though it were through a great number of hazards by sea. For as our ship was drowned in the Adriatic Sea, same place, that we were in it, being about 600 in number, swam for our lives all the night, when, upon the first appearance of the day, and upon our sight of the ship in Cyrene, I and some others, 80 in all by God's providence, prevented the rest, and were taken up into another ship. And when I had thus escaped, and was come to, I don't even know how to say that, which the Italians call Puteoli. That's awfully similar. Let's look at all the similarities here, because there's more than even meets the eye. Josephus mentions Felix, a Roman procurator, right? Acts 22, verse 2. Acts 24, verse 2. When Paul was called in, Tertullus presented his case before Felix. We're going to come back to Felix later on this season, but here's a little spoiler for you. Felix may very well have been the guy that ordered the Gospels to be written. He was a mover and a shaker in the royal court and was very good at understanding how to influence people. Very good chance that that guy is actually who's responsible for the New Testament. Josephus takes charge, and, he's the one, again, he tells everybody what to do, just like Paul does. Also happens to take place in the Adriatic Sea, just like Paul takes charge. And it's in the Adriatic Sea. And they're both on a ship with prisoners that are going to see the emperor in Rome. Finally, Josephus survives and ends up in Puteoli with all the others. Paul survives and ends up in Puteoli with all the others. So they both meet with Felix, who tells them you got to go talk to the emperor. They both get on a boat with prisoners and head into the Adriatic Sea. Both of their ships sink, but everybody survives, and they both end up in Puteoli at the end. Josephus has often been rumored to have been a guy that probably knew more about the Gospels than he let on. He was tied into a whole lot of shit, and it just seems real funny to me that one of Josephus's most famous stories of his own life, because he spent a lot of time writing about other people, but one of his most famous stories of himself just so happens to be perfectly mirrored by Paul. Josephus's shipwreck would have happened around 60 BCE, which allegedly would have been a few years before Paul's. Just saying. It seems awfully funny. Now I want everybody to look at that picture. Go ahead, fire it in the comments. Who does that look like? We'll wait. Got crazy, man. The dude. It does. Would you say that there's a similarity to, possibly God? That, depictions of God, especially Western depictions of God, kind of look similar. Or maybe he looks like Zeus a little bit, too. Kind of got that regal, bearded old man. Sure, right? That's Serapis. Serapis is an amazingly manufactured god. The Romans, really, as we know, the Romans loved to crib Greek history. Big Zeus energy. Exactly. The Romans love to crib Greek history. They also, if they see a god lying around in literally any other religion that they like, they just take it. They're like, no, we have one too. He looks just like him. So they, in trying to bridge their divide with the Egyptians, basically took Zeus and the Egyptian god Osiris and slammed them into one dude like this that was a pothead named Serapis. Serapis was a healing god, and he had a famous temple in Alexandria, one of the 87 Alexandrias, because Alexander was literally the least creative person to ever live. And so Serapis was a god associated with the cult of Asclepius. Of course, that is where you see the Asclepian people were healers. The rod of Asclepius, different than the caduceus. I'm not going to get into that, but there's a difference. Look it up. And people in his cult were renowned as being able to heal people. He was also very popular with Romans. They loved this deity because it had like all their favorite things. They stole something from Greece. They stole something from Egypt. They turned it into this guy with a pot on his head. Everybody loves this fucking guy. And Vespasian decided to pay this god a visit when he had just succeeded, and he had left Titus to mop up Jerusalem. He was on a victory tour now. He was going to make sure that he solidified his base of power. Because, I don't know if I've made this clear before, but being popular in Rome was not enough to make you Roman emperor. Being popular in Rome was fickle. You needed to be popular in all the other areas as well. Vespasian had handled Israel, so he wasn't popular there, but it didn't matter. He had handled it. But yet he was already building up the idea of a cult, that he was the Messiah, and that he was liberating them from the radicals who were trying to overthrow them and lead them into war, that he was delivering them. And he went to Egypt and ingratiated himself to the people that were kind of, running things down there, and said, hey, you back me as emperor, it's a good move. And it worked because he ended up emperor. Well, while he was there, he decided that he needed to make a bigger splash. He didn't need to just go to the temple of Serapis. He needed to have a miraculously good time there. So, when he went to the temple, a blind man comes to Vespasian and says, will you spit in my face? If you spit in my face, I will be able to see again. Seems weird. Like maybe the temple was also a kinky sex dungeon. I don't know. But he did, and magically this man could see again. Now, where have you heard that story before? Oh, that's right. It's in Mark, the book that Vespasian had someone write for him, probably Felix and Josephus. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. And when he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, do you see anything? He looked up and said, I see people. They look like trees walking around. And Jesus said, crap, that didn't work. Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes, and then his eyes were opened, his sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Now, this is really interesting. Not just because the stories mirror, and that Vespasian performed this exact same, very specific method of healing. But I also want you to look at how this differs from some of the other Gospels and Jesus's miracles. Jesus' miracles are often considered to be force of will miracles. Jesus says something and it happens. Notice this miracle in Mark is not that way. Instead, Jesus is more like doing a magic spell. And it doesn't quite work at first, so he has to do it a second time. I'm highlighting this to show you that is a far more Roman thing. Instead of, God always just did things by speaking them in the Hebrew. God said it, it happens. So a Hebrew writing of this would be much more likely that Jesus would have just said, hey, how many fingers am I holding up? And the guy would have said, 2, my Lord, I can see, holy fuck. Instead, Jesus has to go through this whole spit in the dirt, rub it in your eyes. Perhaps that's where the phrase rub some dirt in it comes from. And then it doesn't work because people look like trees. So either he's seen an ent, and we've made another Lord of the Rings reference today, or Jesus fucked up and didn't, get enough mud in his eyes. So he does it a second time. Boom. We have a guy with vision now. That again, the fact that Jesus has to do it twice is very interesting because it seems less like a deity and more like a guy with some supernatural powers, but not infinite cosmic control. I think that's important. Vespasian was visiting the temple of Serapis still, and he met with a man with a withered hand. The man specifically said, if you would just touch my hand, it will be healed. Vespasian is unsure, but is convinced by his people to try. And so he tries, and according to him, the guy was healed. Now, they probably just killed that guy and replaced him with a double, but that's not the point. Because Jesus has another very similar story. And again, he entered the synagogue. Again, just like Vespasian makes 2 trips to his temple, Jesus makes 2 trips to the synagogue here. And a man was there with a withered hand. And they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath so that they might accuse him. Read this through the lens of propaganda, please. And he said to the man with the withered hand, come here. And he said to them, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save a life or to kill? They were silent. And he looked around at them with anger, and grieved at the hardness of their heart, and said to the man, stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. The Pharisees went out immediately and held counsel with the Herodians against him, how to destroy him. So again, what the story here, there's genuine propaganda here. Notice that Jesus seems almost like healing this guy's hand is an afterthought. That is not the main crux of what Jesus cares about in this story. Instead, what Jesus is really interested in is, can he stick it to the Pharisees? Because he's going to heal this guy on the Sabbath. And of course, you should never do work on the Sabbath. What is the whole point of this season? That Christianity is the ultimate form of anti-Semitism. So what is this text saying? That the Semitic laws, the laws of Moses, those are stupid. Shouldn't you do good on the Sabbath, not do nothing at all? You could help this person. But technically, Jesus shouldn't have healed him by the laws of Moses. This story is casting the laws of Moses in a negative light to further show that you just should do it the Roman way. Just believe in Jesus, get rid of all those cumbersome rules, and you look how much more fun it is to be like the Romans. And Vespasian just so happens to do the same thing. So here again, they're paralleling Vespasian to Jesus. They're making that messianic parallel. A parallel that I think should be noted that Herod used to justify his ascent to the throne. Herod claimed to be the star that was foretold that would deliver the Jews. And of course, nobody liked him, so they didn't buy that. And so then they use the star prophecy again to now benefit all the people who hate Herod. And no, it wasn't Herod. It's this guy Jesus. And you know what Jesus said? Jesus said Romans are dope AF, and you should totally just hang out with us. You don't need to worry about observing all those Jewish laws. Just believe in this Jesus guy. And by the way, he said that Romans were super cool and you should try to be like us. So that is our story for today. So if you take anything away from this, what you should be taking away is that the New Testament is just as much recycled, stolen tales of propaganda that the Old Testament is. It's all the same. There's nothing original in there. There's nothing new. They've just retconned stories for propaganda purposes. And these are just a few. I could sit here and do all of them, but I don't think that's going to serve any point. I think you see what I'm driving at here. So next week, we will be back, and we're going to start exploring a few more of these characters that helped create this book. And we're going to specifically look at a book that is not in the Bible. Batman versus Jesus. I can't wait. Yeah, next week we're going to look at a very specific book that is not in the Bible, the Apocalypse of St. Peter. If you remember from our sermon 2 weeks ago, James, Jesus' brother, had his very specific vision of Christianity that involved basically it being Judaism, but also believing that Jesus was the Messiah. And Peter backed that version, where Paul had his very Roman version. Well, we're going to look at the end time book that Peter didn't write it, but somebody from Peter's clan of thinking did. And it's just like the book of Revelation, except for it doesn't have all the analogies that it doesn't have all the analogies to the Romans that Revelation does, which is why it didn't end up in the book. It didn't end up in the Bible. Instead, they picked the pro-Roman one. So we're going to have a little fun and look at the more Jew one, because I think it's very interesting, and I'm sure none of you have really ever read anything about it. It's very interesting. Also, one little fun fact that I feel like I really need to drive home again. The timing of all this. When did Vespasian come to power? In 70 CE. That would be 70 years after the alleged birth of Jesus. Remember that prophecy in Daniel that everybody's always going on about when the Messiah would be born, when he would come and lead the Jews? Daniel talks about 70 weeks, which most people interpret as being years. And so Vespasian fits those. Or at least he retconned the text to make him fit them. So it's all a very easy to dissect plot. And all of these facts are just laying out there. But people would rather believe the fairy tale when the real story is so much more interesting. This is like the ultimate conspiracy. And it's all right out there in the open. Perhaps that's the trick to a good conspiracy, is to put it all out there in the open. Thank you so much, everybody who was here this week. It was good to be back. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. We'll be back on Wednesday with Real Scary. And we will be back next Sunday with another sermon. Who knows, we might get silly and throw another stream in there too, just because we're that kind of guys. So thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And don't be like Herod. Whatever you do, don't be like Herod. If I can impress anything on you, he's literally the worst. Literally the worst. So thanks so much for being here, everybody. And we will see you next week. Take care. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.